Why did no one ever look up when she stood behind the serving line, even though she had been awake longer than all of them? Before the generators at Fob Sentinel fully settled into their low, mechanical hum, before the Afghan sun began to bleed color into the horizon, Bryn Calloway was already moving. Quietly, deliberately, boots touching gravel without sound, breath controlled in a way that came from habit, not effort. At 400, the base was a skeleton of itself. Half light, half sleep, men still dreaming of home or bracing for whatever waited beyond the wire. Bryn slipped past them all unseen, carrying nothing but the weight of routine and something heavier she never named out loud. She didn't go to the galley first. She went to the gym. The metal building smelled of rubber mats, old sweat, and a kind of stubborn resolve that lingered in places where people train not to look weak. At this hour, it was empty, exactly how she liked it. She wrapped her hands around the pull-up bar, calloused palms, scarred knuckles. She pulled herself up once, then again, muscles burning, breath steady. She didn't count out loud, she never did. Counting was for people who needed proof they were working. 20, 30, 40. Her shoulders screamed. She ignored them. Burpees followed, chest to floor, explode upward, again, again. Her lungs felt raw. Sweat darkened her PT shirt, soaked through fabric and skin. Still, she didn't stop. Somewhere deep in her memory, her father's voice surfaced, calm and unyielding. Pain is just your body asking if you're serious. She was. By the time she finished planks and core work, by the time her body trembled with exhaustion, she had already settled something inside herself. Whatever today brought, she would be ready, even if no one else noticed. By 5:15, she was showered, uniform clean, expression neutral. She walked into the galley as if nothing had happened, as if she hadn't just trained like someone preparing for a fight she wasn't allowed to admit she was expecting. The kitchen at Fob Sentinel was her kingdom, even if no one thought of it that way. She moved through it with precision, eggs cracked without shell, bacon laid out evenly, coffee brewed at exactly the strength the SEALs demanded but never thanked her for. She knew their preferences better than they knew her face. At 5:30 they arrived. They moved like predators even at rest, shoulders loose, eyes always scanning, men forged by repetition and consequence. They took their trays, filled them, and walked past her as if she were part of the wall. Not one of them said her name. Senior Chief Marcus Harding entered at 5:45 just like always, big, broad, scarred. His presence bent the room without effort. He snapped his fingers twice, not even turning his head. Coffee black. Bryn poured it, set it at his usual table. He didn't look at her, didn't nod, didn't acknowledge the human being who had just served him. She went back to work. Only one person ever used her name. Thanks, Calloway. Doc Palmer, Navy corpsman, combat medic, the only other woman in the orbit of men who pretended not to notice her until they needed her. Doc met her eyes when she spoke. It was a small thing. It mattered more than it should have. The eggs are better when you make them, Doc added. Bryn allowed herself a brief smile. It faded quickly, but it was real. After breakfast, she moved into inventory. Crates, cans, numbers. Her hands worked automatically while her mind wandered where it always did, outside the wire, beyond the walls, into places she wasn't supposed to think about. That's when her hand paused. A rifle case, dusty, forgotten, tucked into a corner like an afterthought. She knew exactly what was inside. Her fingers twitched. Muscle memory surged. The urge to check the action, to feel the weight of a precision rifle settle into her shoulder, was almost painful. She didn't open it. She walked away. That restraint had been her life for 12 years. That night while washing pots, she listened. Thin walls carried sound easily at Sentinel. Fragments of briefings, tones sharpened by concern, increased activity, probing attacks, Nothing definitive, nothing actionable. Still, her eyes kept drifting to the window. The northern ridgeline rose against the darkening sky, 800 meters out, maybe more. She had paced it herself weeks ago under the excuse of evening exercise. It was perfect. Elevated, natural cover, clear line of sight to the motor pool, the barracks, the command building. If she were planning an attack, that's where she would be. She had mentioned it once, casually, to the watch commander. He had smiled like she was a child asking a serious question, told her to focus on keeping midnight chow warm. She didn't mention it again. Later, lying on her rack, she pulled out the photograph she carried everywhere. Her brother, Reed, grinning in dress whites, taken the day he shipped to Bud S. She whispered to the picture, "Make it through." She didn't tell him about the applications, the denials, the quiet way doors closed without explanation. Outside, an engine rumbled. 15 seconds, diesel, then silence. Bryn's body went rigid. She waited, counted, listened. When nothing else came, she went to the watch commander anyway. "I heard an engine," she said. "North, 800 meters, short run, shut down." He didn't even look up from his magazine. "Probably a local," he said. "Go to sleep, Cookie." She obeyed. She did not sleep. At 3:30, she was awake again, training harder than usual, pushing until it hurt because fear needed somewhere to go. By morning, everything looked the same. The SEALs ate, Harding snapped for coffee, no one looked at her. Except one. "Hey," a young SEAL said, pausing at the line. "I never got your name." She blinked. "Calloway," she said. "Bryn Calloway." He smiled. "These eggs are great, thanks." The moment shattered when Harding's voice cut through the room. "You flirting with the help now?" Laughter heat rushed to her face. She said nothing. Silence was safer. Later, she overheard mission planning. A high-value target, most of the team deploying soon. The words came out before she could stop them. "The ridge line north of the compound." Laughter, then anger. Harding stepped close, too close. "You are a cook," he said quietly. "That's all." She swallowed everything she wanted to say. An hour later, Doc found her in medical. "That observation you made," Doc said, "you weren't wrong." It was the first time anyone had said that. Then the alarm sounded. A drill. But Bryn saw it. A flash glass, optics. She reported it. She was dismissed. That night the engine came again, closer. She climbed Tower 4 with borrowed binoculars. 847 meters. Wind northeast. Perfect conditions. "You see it too." Master Chief Flint Brennan stood behind her. "I've seen your scores," he said. "Someone buried your future." The words hit harder than any insult ever had. "When the moment comes," he said, turning away, "don't wait for permission." She watched the ridge line long after he left. Something was coming. She could feel it. And no one was listening. Why did the morning feel heavier, like the air itself was holding its breath? Dawn crept over Fob Sentinel in a dull gray smear, the kind of light that made everything look unfinished. Bryn stood at the galley window, hands resting on the steel counter, watching the base wake up. Vehicles idled. Radios crackled. Men moved with purpose, but beneath it all was a tension she couldn't shake. Today was the mission. She had known it for days, felt it settling into her bones long before anyone said it out loud. The high-value target. The convoy heading south. Most of the SEAL team would be gone for hours, maybe longer. Which meant the compound would be thin, exposed. She counted them as they loaded up. 1, 2, 3, 18. 18 operators climbing into armored vehicles, weapons slung, faces set in the quiet focus that came before violence. Dust rose as engines roared to life. The gate opened, then closed again behind them. The silence that followed felt wrong. Breakfast service was light, fewer plates, less noise. Even the men who remained didn't eat much. They chewed without appetite, eyes drifting toward the perimeter as if they already sensed what Bryn had been seeing for weeks. Senior Chief Harding sat alone, his knee propped up, fury radiating off him like heat. Being left behind had cut deeper than he wanted anyone to know. Pride did that. Injuries did that. Bryn cleared plates and said nothing. She found Doc Palmer in the medical station, methodically restocking trauma supplies. Tourniquets, gauze, needles laid out with care that bordered on ritual. "Something's wrong," Bryn said quietly. Doc didn't look up at first. Wrong how? The timing, the ridge line, the reflections, the engine sounds at night. Bryn forced herself to breathe. They've been watching us, and now the team's gone. Doc finally turned, studied her face, not dismissive, not amused. "You really believe that?" "I know it." Doc nodded once. "I'll talk to Commander Hayes, see if we can increase watch." 20 minutes later, she came back with tight shoulders and an expression Bryn recognized immediately. "He said he doesn't have the manpower," Doc said, "and that instincts from support staff aren't enough to justify changes." Bryn felt something settle in her chest, heavy, familiar. "Of course." She thanked Doc anyway. The rest of the morning passed in a strange half-world. Bryn moved through the compound under the excuse of routine tasks, but her eyes never stopped working. Sight lines, cover, blind spots, she memorized everything. At 1100, she tried one last time. Harding didn't let her finish. "You are a cook," he said again like a verdict. "Stay in your lane." This time, the words didn't make her angry. They made her afraid. Not for herself. For everyone else. Back in the galley, Lee noticed it immediately. The young Afghan girl had grown up reading danger the way other people read weather. "You are worried," Lee said softly. Bryn forced a smile. It cracked. "If anything happens," Bryn said, lowering her voice, "you hide in the storage room. The walls are reinforced. You don't come out until I get you." Lee's eyes widened, but she nodded. That afternoon, Bryn climbed Tower 4 again, borrowed binoculars, same ridge line, same shadows. 847 meters. Wind steady. Perfect shooting conditions. The first mortar round screamed in without warning. The explosion threw her against the railing. Heat, noise, fire blooming in the motor pool like a living thing. Before her mind could catch up, the second round hit the barracks. The third tore into communications. The base erupted. Alarms shouting, gunfire. This wasn't chaos, this was choreography. They knew exactly where to hit. Enemy fighters poured in from 3 directions, using the smoke and confusion with practiced efficiency. And then she heard it. The crack. Sharp, distant, delayed. A defender dropped on the eastern wall, lifeless before the sound reached her ears. Sniper. Her stomach went cold. Another crack, another man down. The ridge line. Of course. Bryn ran. She sprinted across open ground, bullets snapping past her, the world reduced to instinct and motion. No one aimed at her. No one cared about the cook. Inside the galley, Lee stood frozen in terror. "Storage room," Bryn said, gripping her shoulders. "Now." Lee ran. Bryn turned. Through the window, she saw Doc working on a wounded man under fire. Garrett Stone pinned near the wall, blood soaking his sleeve. Harding shouting orders that no one could execute because every movement drew sniper fire. Then she saw Flint. He was limping toward Tower 4 when the round hit him. He went down hard, dragged himself to the base, and stopped moving. That was when it became clear. No one else could reach the sniper. No one else could stop this. Bryn walked to the storage room, opened the rifle case. The M40A5 felt right in her hands. Familiar, honest. 8 rounds. It would have to be enough. You are not just a cook, Lee whispered from the corner. No, Bryn said, I'm not. She ran again. The enemy sniper saw her this time. Rounds snapped close. She moved fast, low, unpredictable. Training she'd never been allowed to use finally mattered. She reached Flint, applied pressure, met his eyes. Get up there, he rasped. Do not hesitate. She climbed. At the top of Tower 4, the world narrowed. Scope up. Ridge line. There. A shape too still to be rock. She breathed. Calculated. 847 meters. Wind elevation, drop. She waited. Below, Harding's team moved into the open. She fired. 3 shots, 3 enemies dropped near the motor pool. Harding looked up. Saw her. A round slammed into the tower wall, inches from her head. The duel began. She forced suppressive fire, forced the sniper to move. When he did, she took the shot. Hit. Not a kill. She finished it. The ridge line went silent. The battlefield shifted. When it was over, Bryn's hands were steady. She climbed down. Helped Flint. Saved who she could. That night when the convoy returned, Harding spoke words that changed everything. The cook, he said, 847 meters. Later, Hayes found her in the galley, slicing vegetables. Where did you learn to shoot like that? He asked. My father, she said. And the Navy put you in a kitchen. Yes, sir. When Harding came to apologize, she asked him one question. Why? He didn't have an answer that mattered. That night, Bryn cleaned the galley like she always did. But nothing was the same. They knew her name now. And somewhere inside her, something long buried finally breathed again. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It waits. And when the moment comes, it acts. Why did the silence after the firefight feel louder than the battle itself? By morning, Fob Sentinel looked the same on the surface. Sand still drifted along the concrete barriers. The flag still snapped in the wind. Generators still hummed like they always had. But Bryn could feel it, the way you feel a bruise before you see it. Something had shifted, something irreversible. She stood in the galley, slicing onions, the blade rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Her hands didn't shake. They hadn't since the shot. That surprised her more than anything. People passed by the doorway slower now. They looked in, not openly, not boldly, just long enough to confirm what they already knew. That the cook had been on the tower. That the cook had fired the shots that saved them. That the cook had seen the battlefield before anyone else had believed it existed. No one joked that morning. No snapped fingers for coffee. No careless laughter. The SEALs ate quietly, exchanging glances, their confidence dented in a way they didn't quite know how to handle. Senior Chief Harding didn't come in at all. Doc Palmer sat at a corner table, nursing a mug she hadn't touched. You sleep? Doc asked. Bryn shook her head, didn't feel right to. Doc studied her. You okay? The question landed heavier than it should have. Bryn opened her mouth, then closed it again. The truth hovered there, how her heart still raced when she closed her eyes, how the crack of the rifle echoed in her skull, how part of her felt more alive than she had in years and another part felt ashamed of that. I did what needed doing, she said finally. Doc nodded, accepting the answer for what it was, a shield, not a lie. By mid-morning, word had spread beyond Sentinel. A helicopter arrived, rotors chopping the air, bringing officers who walked like they belonged everywhere and nowhere at once. Bryn watched from the galley window as they crossed the compound, faces serious, voices low. This wasn't a congratulatory visit. This was accounting. Commander Hayes called her in just after noon. His office was small, clean, impersonal, the kind of room where decisions were made quickly and consequences lasted a long time. Two other officers were already inside. One she recognized, the other she didn't. "Petty Officer Calloway," Hayes said, at ease. She remained standing. "You violated protocol," one of the officers said immediately. "You accessed restricted weapons. You engaged the enemy without authorization." Bryn met his gaze. "Yes, sir." "And yet," Hayes said quietly, "your actions neutralized an active sniper threat at extreme range under combat conditions." The other officer leaned back, studying her like a puzzle. "Where did you receive advanced marksmanship training?" Bryn hesitated, just long enough to feel the old reflex, to minimize, to deflect, to stay small. "My father," she said, "former Marine Scout sniper. He trained me before he passed. And after, I tried to enlist for combat arms," she said, "multiple times." The room went still. "Why were you denied?" the officer asked. Bryn swallowed. "I was told my aptitude scores were misfiled. Later I was told my role was better suited elsewhere." No one said the words, but they all hung there anyway. "You don't belong." Hayes rubbed his temples. "You understand why this puts us in a difficult position." "Yes, sir." "And yet," the unknown officer said, "if she hadn't acted, we'd be counting body bags." Silence again. Finally Hayes sighed. "You'll remain at Sentinel for now, under observation. Not a punishment. Not a reward." A pause. Bryn nodded, understood. When she left, Harding was waiting outside. He looked smaller somehow, less certain. The man who had once filled rooms with authority now struggled to meet her eyes. "I was wrong," he said. Bryn waited. "I should have listened," he continued. "I should have." "It's done," she said. He flinched, like he'd hoped for absolution and didn't deserve it. "Why didn't you tell us who you were?" he asked. Bryn's voice was calm. "I tried." He nodded slowly. "If it were up to me." "It's not," she said, not unkindly. That night Bryn sat alone on the roof of the galley, watching the stars emerge one by one. The desert cooled quickly after dark. She wrapped her arms around herself, feeling the ache in her shoulders, the quiet throb of exhaustion finally catching up. She thought of Reed, of the way he'd laughed the day he shipped out, fearless and hopeful, of the letter she'd never sent, the one she'd written after her last rejection. "I'm still here, I'm still ready." Footsteps approached. Flint Brennan eased down beside her, moving stiffly but under his own power. "They grounded me," he said, "for now." She nodded. "You shouldn't have been on that tower." "Neither should you," he said, then smiled faintly. "But I'm glad you were." They sat in silence for a while. "You know," he said eventually, "there are people who will fight to keep you where you are." "I know. And there are others," he continued, "who are already making calls." Bryn looked at him. "About what?" "About what to do with someone like you." She stared back at the sky. "I don't want special treatment." Flint chuckled. "That's usually how you know someone deserves it." Days passed, then weeks. Bryn returned to routine. Cooking, cleaning, inventory, but now there were changes, subtle, meaningful. She was invited to sit in on briefings, at first just to listen, then to speak. When she talked about terrain, people listened. When she pointed out vulnerabilities, plans adjusted. She never raised her voice, never pushed. She didn't need to. Her presence did the work for her. Still at night, the doubts crept in. Had she crossed a line she couldn't uncross? Would this end with recognition or quiet removal? One evening, a message arrived. Orders. She was to report to a different compound. Temporary reassignment. No explanation. As she packed her small kit, Lee stood in the doorway, eyes shining. "You are leaving," the girl said. "For a little while." Lee hugged her tightly. You are brave. Bryn closed her eyes, let herself feel it. I was scared, she said softly. Lee smiled. Brave people usually are. The helicopter lifted off at dawn. As Sentinel shrank below her, Bryn felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not certainty, but possibility. And somewhere deep inside, a quiet question began to form. What if this wasn't the end of her silence, but the beginning of her being heard? What do you do when the world finally starts listening, just as you're being pulled away from everything you know? The helicopter set down in a wash of dust and noise, rotors fatting into a heavy quiet that pressed in on Bryn's ears. The compound looked different from Sentinel. Larger, cleaner, fewer makeshift repairs, fewer scars showing on the surface. The kind of place that pretended control was permanent. Bryn stepped off the bird with her rucksack slung over one shoulder, posture neutral, eyes forward. She didn't ask where she was. She learned long ago that questions were currency, and she didn't yet know the exchange rate here. Two Marines met her at the pad. No small talk, no curiosity, just nods and a gesture to follow. Inside, the air was cool, conditioned, almost sterile. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, doors that required more clearance than she'd ever been given before. They led her into a briefing room. 4 people waited. 3 in uniform, 1 in civilian clothes. That was the first thing that made her uneasy. Petty Officer Calloway, the man in civilian clothes, said, standing, "Thank you for coming on short notice." "I didn't have a choice," Bryn replied. A corner of his mouth twitched. "Fair." He gestured for her to sit. She remained standing until everyone else did. Habit, respect, or defiance, she wasn't sure anymore. "You know why you're here," one of the officers said. Bryn met his gaze. "Because I fired a rifle I wasn't authorized to touch." "And because you made an 847-meter kill shot under live fire," another added, "with hostile rounds impacting your position." 2 shots, Bryn corrected quietly. The first was a disabling hit. The room went still. The man in civilian clothes studied her more closely now. "You don't embellish." "No, sir." "Good," he said. "We don't either." He slid a folder across the table. Inside were documents Bryn had seen before. Her aptitude tests, her marksmanship scores, psychological evaluations, all stamped, all official, all previously ignored. "Do you know why you were denied combat placement?" he asked. Bryn took a breath. "Because I didn't fit." He nodded. "Because someone decided you were a liability, not for your skill, for your presence." Anger flared hot and sharp, but she kept her voice level. "That decision almost got people killed." "Yes," he said simply, "it did." Silence settled again, thick with things no one wanted to name. "We're not here to punish you," the civilian said at last. "We're here to decide whether we waste you." Bryn blinked just once. He leaned forward. "You have a choice." The word felt unreal. "There's a unit," he continued. "Small, quiet, it doesn't recruit, it observes. Occasionally it intervenes." "And you want me to cook for them," Bryn said. A few of the officers smiled, not mockingly, carefully. "No," the man said, "we want you to see." She frowned. "See what?" "Patterns," he said. "Threats before they're visible, terrain before it's weaponized, people before they become targets." Bryn hesitated. "I'm not intelligence." "You're something better," he replied. "You notice." The room waited. "What happens if I say no?" she asked. The man didn't dodge it. "You go back to Sentinel or somewhere like it, quietly. Eventually someone else writes your story." Bryn thought of the ridge line, of Flint bleeding at the base of the tower, of Harding snapping his fingers for coffee. "And if I say yes?" "You disappear," he said. "Officially, no rank progression, no public record, no guarantees." She exhaled slowly. "And when things go wrong?" "They usually do," he said. "That's why we exist." Bryn looked at her hands, steady, scarred, capable. "I'm not interested in being a symbol," she said. "Neither are we," the civilian replied. "We're interested in outcomes." She stood there for a long moment, the weight of every rejection and every quiet endurance pressing against the promise of something dangerous and undefined. "Will I be trained?" she asked. "Yes." "Will I be listened to?" He met her eyes. "You already are." She nodded once, "Then I'm in." The transition was abrupt. No ceremony, no goodbyes. Her phone was taken, her ID replaced, her name removed from rosters she'd only just been added to. She didn't even know what to call herself anymore. Training began immediately. Not the kind she'd expected. Less about speed, more about restraint, less about shooting, more about when not to. They put her in rooms with maps and asked her to sit silently for hours, tracking imaginary movements across terrain that changed without warning. They tested her patience, her memory, her ability to hold uncertainty without breaking. Sometimes they brought in operators, men and women with eyes that had seen too much, and asked Bryn to brief them. The first time her voice shook. The second time it didn't. On the range, they finally let her stretch. Different rifles, different optics, longer distances, worse conditions. She missed once. No one scolded her. They asked her why. "I rushed," she said, "because I thought expectation mattered more than accuracy." The instructor nodded. "It doesn't." At night, alone in a bunk that felt too clean to be real, Bryn wrestled with the quiet. At Sentinel, she'd been invisible. Here she was being watched. Which was more dangerous, she wasn't sure. Weeks passed, maybe months. One evening, the civilian man returned. He didn't bring a folder this time. "There's a situation," he said. "Different theater, different rules." Bryn felt the familiar tightening in her chest. "Do I carry a rifle?" she asked. "Not this time," he said. "You carry perspective." She almost smiled. As she prepared to deploy again, into another unknown, Bryn thought about how easily silence could be mistaken for weakness. And how dangerous that misunderstanding could be. Because some people weren't quiet because they lacked strength. They were quiet because they were learning where to place it. Why did her hands feel heavier this time, even though she wasn't carrying a weapon? The transport aircraft droned steadily through the night, a constant vibration that seeped into bone and thought alike. Bryn sat strapped in along the fuselage, helmet resting against the webbing, eyes open but unfocused. Around her, others waited in the same silence, operators, analysts, specialists whose names she didn't know and likely never would. No unit patches, no chatter. Just purpose. She glanced down at her hands. Empty. No rifle. No familiar way to anchor her thoughts. It made her uneasy in a way she hadn't expected. For years, the problem had been not being allowed to act. Now she was allowed and stripped of the tools she trusted most. Perspective, they'd said. She wasn't sure how you measured that under fire. The wheels hit the runway hard, somewhere far from Sentinel. Different soil, different air. The ramp dropped and heat rushed in thick and wet, carrying the scent of vegetation and rot. Jungle this time, not desert. They moved fast, vehicles waiting. No lights, no wasted motion. Bryn took the seat beside a man whose eyes never stopped moving. He gave her a brief nod. That was all. The briefing came later, in a windowless room, one dim map projected on the wall. A village sat between two river bends, insurgent-controlled territory, not openly hostile, but not safe. Intelligence suggested a weapons transfer would happen there within 48 hours. No confirmation, no names, just probability. "We can't strike," the team lead said. "Too many civilians, too much uncertainty." "So why are we here?" someone asked. the lead glanced at Bryn, because she noticed something others missed. Every eye turned to her. She felt the old instinct, to shrink, to defer, flare, and then fade. "The river," she said, stepping forward. "Seasonal flooding changed the banks. The satellite images you're using are outdated by 6 months. That footpath on the west side doesn't exist anymore." Murmurs, questions. "And the new path?" the lead asked. "Runs along the eastern tree line," Bryn replied. "It's higher ground, natural cover. If you were moving weapons quietly, that's the route you'd use." The room was silent again, not dismissive this time. "Which means," she continued, "anyone watching the west is watching the wrong place." They adjusted the plan. No one argued. They moved before dawn. Bryn rode in the second vehicle, scanning constantly, not for targets, for absence, for patterns that didn't quite fit, a dog that didn't bark, a doorway that stayed open too long, a path too clean for how little it was used. Her chest tightened as they approached the village. This wasn't a battlefield, it was homes, children's sandals by a door, cooking fires still warm, the weight of it pressed against her ribs. This was why they couldn't miss. They dismounted quietly, spreading out in loose overwatch. Bryn moved with them, not leading, not lagging, just present. Then she felt it. Not saw it, felt it. A wrongness near the eastern tree line. The undergrowth was trampled but recently. Hours, not days. And there, faint impressions in the mud. Heavy loads dragged, not carried. She signaled. The team froze. They followed her gaze, adjusted positions. Time stretched thin. Minutes passed. Then shadows moved. Men emerged from the trees, burdened with crates, armed but cautious, exactly as she'd imagined. The team lead whispered, "We have eyes." They waited, let the full picture form. A truck rolled in from the north, covered, civilian plates. The exchange began. No sudden heroics, no shouting. The team recorded, counted, identified faces. And then something shifted. A child wandered too close. One of the armed men stiffened, hand tightening on his rifle. Bryn's heart slammed. If this went wrong, it wouldn't be clean. It would be a tragedy. She moved without thinking, stepping into view. Hands empty, body language calm. The armed man froze, confused by the sudden appearance of a lone woman where none should be. She met his eyes. Said nothing. Behind her, unseen, the team adjusted. The child's mother shouted, pulling him back. The moment broke. The armed men finished quickly, loaded the truck, left. Only when the dust settled did Bryn realize her hands were shaking. Back at the safe site, no one spoke for a long time. Finally, the team lead exhaled. That could have gone very differently. "Yes," Bryn said. He looked at her. "Why did you step out?" She thought about it. "Because sometimes," she said slowly, "the safest move is to be seen." He nodded, perspective. That night, alone again, Bryn felt the familiar mix of pride and unease twist together inside her. She hadn't fired a shot. She hadn't stopped the weapon's transfer, not directly. But she'd prevented bloodshed. And somehow, that felt heavier than pulling a trigger. A message came through hours later. The convoy from Sentinel had been hit weeks after she left. Not catastrophic, but bad. She stared at the words, guilt blooming sharp and sudden. If she'd stayed, if she'd been there. Flint's voice echoed in her memory. You can't be everywhere. She knew that. Knowing didn't make it easier. The civilian man visited the next morning. You did well, he said. I didn't stop them, Bryn replied. You prevented something worse, he countered. That counts. She looked away. Does it? He studied her. You're learning the hardest part of this work. What's that? That success often looks like nothing happened. As the days passed, Bryn felt herself changing. Not harder, more precise, less driven by the need to prove anything. She began to understand what they were shaping her into. Not a weapon, a restraint. And in a world eager for simple answers and loud solutions, she wasn't sure which role required more strength. But she was beginning to suspect the quieter one did. Why did the quiet feel so heavy when everything had gone exactly as planned? The debrief room smelled faintly of stale coffee and ozone from overworked electronics. Bryn sat with her back straight, hands folded, listening as voices picked apart the operation piece by piece. Timelines, decision points, what-ifs. Her name came up more than once. Not with praise, not with criticism, just acknowledgement. And somehow, that unsettled her more than either would have. Your assessment of the terrain was the key variable, one analyst said. Without it, we'd have positioned west and spooked them. Bryn nodded, said nothing. The civilian man, she still didn't know his real name, watched her from across the table. His gaze wasn't sharp. It was patient, like he was waiting to see which version of her would speak. When the room cleared, he remained. "You're quieter than usual," he said. "I'm thinking," Bryn replied. "About." She hesitated. "About whether doing nothing is something I can live with." He leaned back. "You didn't do nothing." "It feels like it," she said. They walked away, armed, organized, still dangerous. "And a child walked away alive," he countered gently. That landed. Bryn exhaled slowly. The tension in her shoulders eased a fraction. They deployed again 2 days later. Different village, same region, same pattern. Watch, wait, decide. This time the wait stretched longer. Hours turned into days. Heat soaked into everything. Bugs found every exposed inch of skin. Sleep came in fragments. And in that stretched-out silence, doubts crept in. At Sentinel, she'd been defined by what she could do with a rifle. Here, she was defined by what she chose not to do. It felt like standing on the edge of something, knowing one step either way could change everything. On the third night, the team picked up movement along a ridge overlooking the village. Not armed, not hostile, just men with radios. Spotters. Bryn studied them through borrowed optics, noted their spacing, their posture, too relaxed to be professionals, too cautious to be random. "They're testing us," she said quietly. The team lead frowned. "How do you know?" "They're looking where they expect something to happen," she replied, "not where it would." He adjusted his scope. "Meaning?" "Meaning they don't know we're here yet," Bryn said, "but they're close." The decision came fast after that. They withdrew before dawn. No confrontation, no escalation. Back at base, the mood was subdued. "You think they noticed?" someone asked. "They noticed something," Bryn said. "They just don't know what." That answer followed her into the night. Sleep didn't come easily. When it did, it brought dreams of the tower at Sentinel, the weight of the rifle, the crack of the shot, the certainty of action. She woke with her heart racing, palms damp. For the first time since joining this shadowed world, she wondered if she was losing something essential by not using her full skill. The civilian man found her on the perimeter at dawn. "You miss it," he said, not asking. She didn't deny it. "I miss knowing." He nodded. "Certainty is addictive." "What if I'm wrong?" she asked. "What if my hesitation costs lives?" He took his time answering. "Then we live with it, the same way we live with every other consequence in this line of work." That didn't comfort her. But it was honest. The next operation came without warning. Urban this time, tight streets, civilians everywhere, intelligence thin and unreliable. They were there to extract someone, not kill, not capture, just remove. Bryn moved with the team, senses stretched thin. Every sound felt amplified, every shadow suspicious. Halfway through the operation, everything shifted. A patrol appeared where there shouldn't have been one, armed, alert. The team froze. Any aggressive move would trigger a firefight in the middle of a crowded neighborhood. Bryn's mind raced. She scanned rooftops, windows, escape routes. And then she saw it. A market stall closing early, a woman ushering children inside, a ripple of tension moving through the crowd seconds before the patrol arrived. "They've been tipped off," she whispered, "but not about us." The team lead met her eyes. Options. Bryn swallowed. This was the moment, the kind she'd trained for without knowing she was training for it. "We leave," she said, "now, before we become the reason this turns violent." The lead hesitated. "The asset." "We'll still be there tomorrow," Bryn said, "if we're not." "A beat. Then move." They extracted cleanly. No shots fired, no civilians harmed. Back at base, the debrief was tense. Frustration bubbled beneath professionalism. Finally, the team lead spoke. "You overruled momentum," he said to Bryn. "That's not easy." "It felt necessary," she replied. He nodded slowly. "It was." That night, Bryn sat alone again, staring at the dark beyond the lights. She realized something then. Strength wasn't just the ability to act. It was the discipline to wait. The courage to choose restraint when every instinct screamed for action. And the humility to accept that not every victory would be visible. She thought of the cook they once laughed at, the woman behind the counter, the silence. And she understood now that silence wasn't absence. It was space. Space to see. Space to choose. Space to protect without being seen. Sometimes the most powerful force in a conflict isn't the shot that's fired, but the one that never is. Why did the last mission feel less like an ending and more like a quiet reckoning she had been avoiding? The call came without ceremony. No build-up, no warning, just a knock at the door and a name spoken in a voice that didn't expect refusal. Bryn knew before she stood up that this one would be different. The briefing was sparse, purposefully so, a fractured region, competing interests, a local force trained quickly, unevenly, and sent to hold a position that mattered more symbolically than strategically, the kind of place where mistakes multiplied fast. And there it was on the satellite image. A ridge line. Her chest tightened before she could stop it. "It's not sentinel," the civilian man said, reading her expression, "but it rhymes." Bryn nodded. "They always do." This time she was allowed a rifle. Not because she asked. Because no one questioned it. The weight of it across her back felt familiar, comforting, dangerous in its own way. She checked it once, then again. Her hands moved with a certainty that felt like greeting an old friend she'd never stopped missing. They inserted at dusk. The local unit was already dug in, nervous, undertrained, eyes darting at every sound. Bryn studied them quietly. Fear didn't disqualify them. Ignorance did. She walked the perimeter with their commander, pointing things out gently. Lines of sight, gaps, places where the ground told a story their maps didn't. He listened. That still surprised her. Night fell fast. Too fast. The first contact came as probing fire. Distant, testing, not meant to kill, meant to measure. Bryn felt the rhythm immediately. The pauses, the spacing, the patience. "They're waiting," she murmured. "For what?" the commander asked. "For us to think we're safe." The ridge line loomed in the dark. She didn't need optics to feel its presence. She climbed to a higher position, slow and deliberate, settled in, let the world narrow. Through the scope, shadows took shape. Movement revealed itself not by speed, but by intention. She tracked one figure for nearly 10 minutes before she was sure. Not hostile yet. Not innocent either. Her finger rested near the trigger, not on it. Below, the local unit shifted nervously. One wrong move and everything would unravel. Her radio crackled softly. "You have eyes." "Yes," she whispered. "Take the shot if you need to." "If you need to." The words mattered. She watched longer. Then she saw it, the signal. Subtle, a tilt of the head, a hand brushing the dirt. The attack was coming. She fired once. Clean, controlled, not lethal. The figure went down screaming. The night exploded into motion. Return fire erupted from the ridge, but now it was rushed, uncoordinated. They'd lost the advantage. The local unit held. Bryn shifted positions, fired again, this time decisive. The firefight was brief, violent, then over. When the silence returned, it felt earned. At dawn, she walked the ridge line alone. She stood where the enemy sniper had stood, looked down at the position she'd protected. The distance was almost identical. She felt something loosen inside her, not triumph, not relief. Closure. Later, as the sun climbed, the civilian man approached her. "You could stay," he said quietly. "You've proven everything." Bryn didn't answer right away. She thought of the galley at Sentinel, of Lee's hug, of Harding's apology that came too late to matter, of the long years of being unseen. "I don't need to disappear anymore," she said finally. He nodded. "Then what will you do?" She considered the question carefully. "I'll go where I'm useful," she said, "and where I can help others be seen before it's too late." He smiled faintly. "That might be harder than this." "I know," she said. When she returned stateside, there were no medals waiting, no headlines, just a reassignment with carefully chosen language and a quiet authority that didn't need to explain itself. She stood in a different galley months later, not as a cook, but as an instructor addressing a small group of young sailors and soldiers. Some of them listened immediately. Some didn't. She recognized herself in both. She told them stories, not heroic ones, honest ones about waiting, about being ignored, about moments when speaking too soon or too loudly would have ruined everything. She didn't mention the shot unless they asked. One day, a young woman stayed behind. "They don't take me seriously," she said. "I keep being told to wait my turn." Bryn studied her, saw the tension, the fire held carefully in check. "Waiting isn't the same as giving up," Bryn said, "but you have to know the difference." "How?" the woman asked. Bryn thought of the ridge line, of the silence before the shot. "You listen," she said, "and when the moment comes, you act." Years later, someone would tell the story wrong. They'd say the SEALs laughed at a cook, until one perfect shot humbled them. It made for a cleaner ending. Bryn never corrected them. She knew the truth was quieter. That dignity doesn't announce itself. It endures. It watches. And when the world finally needs it, it steps forward, steady and unafraid, and lets its actions speak.